This is Inner Work, a spiritual growth podcast, a sanctuary for healers, lightworkers, and spiritual practitioners here to raise consciousness on this planet. You've come to the right place to heal yourself and fully awaken your unique gifts so you can show up to serve others as powerfully and purposefully as possible. I am your host, Josephine Hartman, a certified intuitive healer and Akashic Records master teacher. I'm honored you're here and delighted to walk with you on your path for a little while. To connect with me and explore ways of working together, please head over to josephinehartman.com. The human ego is one of the major obstacles, if not the major obstacle, that can create static, noise, and interference in spiritual practice, and more specifically for our purposes on this podcast, in being able to powerfully and easily and reliably connect to the Akashic Records. I get multiple questions every week in one way or another, either in my training programs, or from email subscribers or people doing my free Akashic Records mini course, about how to get the ego self out of the way when we are working with the Akashic Records. Now, of course, sometimes people might not be fully aware that they're asking about ego interference. So they might ask a question about how to get self-doubt out of the way when they're trying to access the records or they're trying to meditate. They might ask, how can I silence my mental chatter, which is incessant? They might ask, how can I get to a place of not being attached to what happens or what doesn't happen while I am in the Akashic Records or in a deep meditation? All of these questions at their core are about ego-mind interference. So I figured it would be a great idea to put together this mini-series on this particular topic for the podcast. And so here we are. This is a 10-part series where we'll go through the most common forms of ego interference and a few tips for how to clear out that interference so it doesn't derail you and it doesn't prevent you from connecting to the Akashic Records or from expanding your spiritual practice and intuition in really powerful ways. This is part 1. If you've been getting some value out of this podcast, I'd be so thrilled and full of joy if you would take a minute or two to leave a rating or review or both on whatever podcast app you are listening to this right now. This helps to grow the podcast and for it to find its way to more listeners just like you. So thank you so much for your support with that. You're also warmly and lovingly invited to join my email community, which is completely free and gives you access to my full and free Akashic Records mini course and weekly newsletter. You can join us by clicking the link in the show notes. So let's talk about ego interference in spiritual practice and Akashic Records work, part 1. Today we're talking about self-doubt. And I'm starting with self-doubt because this is really typically the most common one that tends to come up. Now, in Buddhist philosophy, there are 5 major hindrances that come up on the spiritual path or the path of spiritual enlightenment. And one of these 5 major hindrances is doubt. Doubt can distract us from the path or prevent us from continuing to heal and evolve. I want to share with you a quote from the book Seeking the Heart of Wisdom by Buddhist teacher Jack Kornfield, where he addresses this issue of doubt, and he does it really in a beautiful way. So he says, Doubt can be the most difficult of the five hindrances to work with because when we believe it and get caught by it, our practice just stops cold. We become paralyzed. All kinds of doubt might assail us. Doubts about ourselves and our capacities, doubts about our teachers, doubts about the path itself. We might doubt the practice. So, for example, sitting meditation, or doubt that it is the right practice for us. Or we might think it's the right practice, but the wrong time. Or it's the right practice and the right time, but our body is not in good enough shape yet. It doesn't matter what the object is, when the skeptical, doubting mind catches us, we are stuck. And that's the end of that great quote. So, in a lot of ways, it is the very nature of our ego mind to doubt and to look for problems or potential problems everywhere and to complain about things and to need for everything to be ideal or perfect before we can even sit down to meditate. So, the ego really tries to look for these potential problems and solve them in advance so we won't be caught unaware should those problems come to pass at some future time. So these doubts and second guessing can be really sneaky and can prevent us from being decisive. They can prevent us from fully committing to our path and evolution. They can keep us from trusting unconditionally that we are on the right path. Even if obstacles come up, it is still the right path. It can prevent us from trusting unconditionally that the spiritual practices we have chosen to engage in are powerful and useful and right for us right now. I think this is why so many people, so many of us start a meditation practice and then we quit or we procrastinate and we don't come and sit on the meditation cushion, even though we've made a commitment to ourselves to do that, because doubt can sneak in, skepticism can sneak in, distractions can sneak in from the ego that take us away from that meditation cushion, so to speak. In Akashic Records work, doubt can sneak in when we start to question things like, am I really seeing these images? Am I really receiving and feeling these messages from a higher source of guidance? Or am I making them up? Am I just inventing all of this out of thin air? These kinds of incessant questions can interfere with your ability to be completely present and receptive when you are in the records, which in turn, of course, gets in the way of your capacity to powerfully receive everything the records are trying to give you. You may also doubt your ability to connect to the records in the first place and to be a clear channel or translator for the records. Self-doubt may show up as you questioning your intuitive gifts, whether you have any gifts, and whether what you are receiving from the records is quote unquote real. So, the antidote to this kind of self-doubt is really twofold, but in some ways it's the same thing. The antidote is faith and trust. The opposite to doubt really is trust. So trust in yourself, of course, that is fundamental. Trust in your multidimensional gifts and intuitive abilities. Trust in your divine birthright to be able to tap into a superconscious field, such as the records. Trust in your inner discernment that you do know when you are receiving information or wisdom or insights from a higher source beyond the human dimension, beyond your ego self, you do know in your gut, in your body, in your heart, when that is happening, that you can trust, that you know the difference. You do know how to distinguish between the voice of higher self and the voice of the Akashic Records versus that nagging or judgmental or fear inducing voice of your ego self. And we all have that voice, by the way. We all have this egoic voice speaking within us at some points, from our conditioning and programming and how we grew up and all of that stuff. And because ultimately the ego self is just a natural human construct. It's just a human part of ourselves that is trying to keep us safe and protected. As I always say, we don't have to demonize the ego. We don't have to fear the ego. We don't have to try to get rid of it, which is ultimately impossible while we are still incarnated in physical bodies. So it's just about building more and more and more awareness of how that ego voice sounds, how you feel in your body and in your mind when that ego voice gets triggered. So, what are the sensations that come when that happens, that you experience? And really trusting yourself that by using your body as a guide, you can absolutely tell the difference reliably and accurately when you are hearing and feeling the voice of higher self, of a higher source of wisdom, versus this more egoic 3D voice. To counteract self-doubt, you have to lean into and activate an energy of unwavering faith in yourself, in divine source, in the Akashic records, if you're working with the records, and also faith in the laws of the universe, which you absolutely can trust and rely on every single time, because those universal laws of how reality operates, they're never going to change. They are constant. Like the law of gravity, for instance, that is a law of reality. It determines how our world functions whether we believe in the law of gravity or not. So, in other words, the law of gravity is not affected by our human doubt. Whether we question it or not, it is still the law and it is still going to be constant and ever present. So, the law of gravity just is. In the same way, there is a universal law that determines we all have a birthright to access the Akashic records, for example, and receive helpful guidance and healing from this higher field of consciousness. There is a universal law that when you consciously and clearly connect to the Akashic records, there is nowhere else you could be. And anything you receive, sense, notice, feel, or see in that state of connectedness and deep intuition and clear receptivity, it is coming from divine source. It is coming from the records and from your higher self. It couldn't be coming from anywhere else. This is something you can put all of your faith in because it's just the way things are. There is no uncertainty about that. It's just a cosmic fact. So, the way through and eventually out of self-doubt is to lean into and expand your capacity to trust. And it's so important as you do this to notice also the distinction between a state of self-doubt in your mind and in your body versus a state of trust and faith in your mind and in your body. So, again, if we are practicing this somatically, feeling it in the body, what can you observe your mind doing when you're caught in a loop of self doubt? What does your mind do? And what does your body do in response to your mind in that state of self-doubt? Maybe your body tenses up. This is typically what happens. Maybe your body braces itself as though there is a threat in the environment. Does your body close off in some way? Or maybe you feel your stomach dropping. And the opposite side of this is also to explore, what does your mind do when you consciously lean into trust and faith? What does your mind do when you consciously choose to use your free will and your power of choice to lean into trust, to let go, to surrender, to have faith? How does your body respond to that when your mind can rest even for a few seconds or a minute in a state of trust? How does your body, how does your heart, your chest, your stomach, how do all these parts of you open up and respond to that state of trust? So your work, moving on, if you want to take this on, is to explore all of this for the next few days or weeks. If self-doubt has been a major obstacle for you, or something that has gotten in your way and interfered with your spiritual practices or Akashic Records work in the past. Maybe you have a sense that self-doubt has kept you from going as deeply as you know you can, or as you know is possible. So if that is the case, then just exploring all of this, feeling that difference in your body when you are in a state of self-doubt versus a state of trust, and consciously making the choice day by day, hour by hour, to surrender, to lean into trust, to know that you are on the right path, to know that if you keep walking this path, amazing healing and insights and shifts are going to happen for you. So just leaning into that and trusting all of that as much as you can. So let me know how it goes. If you feel called, you can connect with me by visiting josephinehartman.com or send a note to me at josephinehartman.com. I would love to hear how this series supports you. So I'll catch you in the next part of this mini series on ego interference. Please be well in the meantime. Take really good care of yourself, and thank you so much for being here.